Well, welcome to our panel today on AI-powered pharmaceuticals, intelligent drug discovery and clinical trials, or in other words, how can we use AI to improve and maybe even vastly improve or revolutionize the drug discovery process and clinical trials. By way of introduction, I am Joe Fireman. I'm legal counsel at Verily, an alphabet company that does healthcare and life sciences work. And I'm joined today by our expert group of panelists who work on the use of AI for crucial aspects of the drug development process and clinical trials, everything from identifying and screening candidate molecules to improving clinical trials and anonymization of patient data, to making better use of manufacturing batch records, and even enhancing FDA submissions and maybe even predicting the success of FDA submissions. So with that, I think we have a really good group that represents all the various ways that AI can be used in the very large and complicated industry that is the drug development and clinical trial industry. And so with that, I think I'll just start by asking each of our panelists to introduce themselves, say a bit about who they are, what is the problem that they use AI to try to solve, and I guess with that, maybe we'll start right here.
Awesome, thank you. So hey everyone, I'm Bikalpa. I go by Bik. I'm the head of AI in Takeda. So it's a R&D driven large pharmaceuticals. Well, that's a broad field, right? Where do I start with from AI? So I manage a team, a pretty broad distributed team that offers three kinds of services around AI. One I call AI as an experimentation. So it's called experimentation as a service for anything around Gen AI, for example. I try to bring latest and greatest tools that's happening in the platform space, open source models, and different application spaces, right? My job is to make sure those technologies have safe place to play with inside Takeda, making sure the data is protected. The second aspect is AI as a service itself. So a lot of the vendors out here, right, the technology platforms, these platforms come up with some kind of AI infused in it. It's technically impossible for a company like Takeda to be developing everything in-house. So one of the aspects of growing AI in large enterprise like Takeda is making full use of platform spaces out there. So my team also goes around different business units, business functions, try to find the business use cases that are high value activities within the corporation that really aligns with our corporate priorities and make sure everyone gets the right consultation and subject matter expertise. Right? The idea here is to seek in-house expertise as much as possible rather than going out externally, in the first, preliminary rounds. And the last service I do provide is data science as a service around different aspects of modeling. You mentioned, right? So FDA submissions improvement. I have a series of experiments that's going on in terms of enhancing the quality of submissions, predicting the success of clinical trials, designing best route to market for our supply chain and manufacturing unit. And there's so much, right? Plenty of application space. We'll be talking about those at greater detail, I guess, in the next few minutes. But yeah, glad to be here.
And we'll just go down the line. So Zach, you want to go ahead?
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Zach Weingarden, Director of Product Solutions with TrialAssure. We're a software company that provides support to clinical trial sponsors, drug companies in the area of clinical trial transparency. So there's a couple different applications that we have that address a few different things. And we've sort of realized that AI in a couple different ways can play a role in enhancing our offering and making things a lot more efficient for pharmaceutical companies to be able to ultimately share information, clinical study reports or their data, whatever it might be, with the public or with other researchers, depending on the case. So one example that's was pretty obvious to us as AI functionality started to become more apparent is anonymization of clinical trial documents. A huge problem in clinical trials is that you write a clinical study report and a series of clinical documents that are intended for the regulators to make a determination as to whether this product should go to market or not. And these documents are written for that audience, and they include a lot of information that is about the specific patients that were in the trial, and it's identifying medical information about them, obviously. So in order to share this information, there's also this big movement to be more transparent industry-wide and share these documents with the public. There needs to be a transformation. You can't just post it as is, right? It needs to be anonymized so that you're not releasing people's private information. There's also potentially company confidential information in it as well. But these are documents that are in the tens to hundreds of thousands of pages. So you can only imagine the manual effort that would have to go to actually make those changes. Well, AI can play a role into doing that much more efficiently, finding pieces of text within that document and categorizing it, and identifying what change or substitution should take place. So you could just redact things, and there are situations where you want to, but anonymization is the idea of replacing it with something that retains utility, and that's very important in a lot of cases. So that's an application that we have where we really built some AI functionalities, and it's really enhanced the ability of our software to make this more efficient and effective across the board.
Great. My name is Abraham Heifets. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Atomwise. And the way I think about AI for the pharmaceutical industry is really that there's three categories. There's the AI for biology. And the question there is, what's a good protein to block? How do you arrest a disease process? So here, the outcome might be something that says, if you block protein XYZ, you'll stop progression of Alzheimer's. That's AI for biology. Once you do that, you need the drug that's safe and effective, right? If you just point out that protein XYZ will stop Alzheimer's, that's maybe a paper in Nature and Cell, but you haven't helped a patient. So that brings you to the AI for chemistry, where you build the drug that's safe and effective, okay? And so that's where we play. And then once you have the drug, then you have to go to the clinical trials. That's the third category, AI for clinical trials, to run that effectively and prove that you built what you intended to build. And so Atomwise plays in this AI for chemistry space. So how do you design molecules which are safe, which are effective, which are stable in the body, which are metabolized effectively and correctly, and so forth. And so in some sense, what we're looking to build, because today the reality is a lot of that process is driven by human intuition, human judgment, and serendipity, is we're trying to build tools for the medicinal chemist. So think of it as the Iron Man suit for a medicinal chemist.
That's great. My name is Abhijit. I go by Abhi, and I'm the CTO and co-founder for Aventior. We are also a software technology company, and we do a very simple thing. We transcribe data from documents, which you find plenty in biopharma and life sciences space, and convert that into structured data. And that helps in numerous different things, starting from analysis to investigations, to speed up the whole drug manufacturing and release process. With the advent of cell and gene therapy especially, the whole manufacturing process has become extremely complex. It's no longer what used to be in the 70s and 80s, and that demands a lot of documentation and compliance. And that becomes a bottleneck for a lot of these companies to actually access the data and make meaning of it. And that's what we do, is to kind of simplify the whole process, use AI in this whole process, and we have been fairly successful. It's a fun journey that we have had till now, and I would love to share more with all of you in this process, in this meeting today.
Great. So we've heard about really a variety of ways that AI is being used, and what I'd like to ask next is just, what do you think is the biggest challenge or obstacle to being successful in what you do? In other words, what is sort of a key foundational challenge that if you get this right, you feel like you can really unlock the potential of AI in the work you do? And maybe we'll go in reverse order this time.
Okay,
If you want to start.
All right. Yeah, I love this topic actually, and we faced this problem right from the very inception, right from the time we actually developed this product. And people talk about AI as being the magic bullet that will do everything for you. And the biggest challenge we face is accuracy. And we support a GXP environment. We support a GXP process where the manufacturing process of drugs and the associated data can never go wrong. So if you're applying AI, our biggest challenge is to ensure that everything is 100% correct. And maybe a lot of people might not like to hear this, but we do bring in human element in this whole process. We layer the AI with on top of the AI, we layer with a human powered workflow that ensures that the net outcome is 100% right. And that's really how we have overcome the challenge. We continue to improve the whole process, and I believe that there's similar stories everywhere where can AI do everything for you and do it correctly.
And in terms of that challenge of ensuring accuracy, how much, to what extent is it enough data and the right data? To what extent is it processes for quality control? To what extent is it sort of human intervention, human oversight? Do you want to just go into that a bit?
Yeah, actually, that's a great question. So I think it's largely fueled from the fact that it's actually both enough data and right data, and more so on the enough data, right? So do we have enough data to consider all the use cases? And sometimes no, and that's where the human intellect, the human experience comes to picture and say, okay, how do we ensure that this gap is kind of minimized over a period of time? And it also depends on how you select the human, actors who would play a role to help teach that underlying AI platform to become better and better.
Great. Well, Abe, do you want to take us through fundamental challenges?
Sure, fundamental challenge. Easy question. Great. Okay, I'm going to assume that this audience is mostly an AI audience, just by dint of, the conference itself. But correct me if I'm wrong out there. So I'm going to use terminology for machine learning people, and I think the problem, at least that we face, and sort of our corner of it in this AI for chemistry space, I think it's out of domain generalization. Okay, so the AI practitioners, probably be nodding along, but essentially if you have training data over here and you want to predict over here, right? Like it's out of domain. Your test set, your prediction set doesn't exactly look like your training data. Okay, so with humans we try to generalize, we try to learn principles rather than memorizing, and it turns out that in AI for chemistry, actually in a lot of AI, if you're not extraordinarily careful, it's very easy to teach to the test, right? The AI memorizes what answers look like, and then it does really, really well on this part where all your test cases come from, but what you care about is out here. And the reason why that's particularly acute challenge, I think, in drug discovery is because we're always pushing into the new frontiers and the new domains, okay? Think about it, right? Like every day there is a researcher at Stanford, at Harvard, at Oxford who discovers a new protein, right? Or a new interaction of proteins that we never knew before, right? And so that's something new which wasn't in the training data, right? Every day a researcher in a chemistry department comes up with a new coupling reaction. You can make a molecule which you never made before. And so now you say, can I use this for anything? You're pulling from a new distribution which was never in your training data, right? But more than just the processes of human discovery and innovation and intuition, we have the incredibly powerful force of economics and the US Patent Office, right? And the Patent Office won't let you patent the thing that somebody else has patented. True? Keep me honest.
Correct.
Right. Okay, so
Great legal mind.
and so that means that you always have to be pushing if you want to get paid and be able to discover the next medicine the day after and the day after and the day after. You have to be able to patent something novel, right? Like that's one of the cornerstones. And so all of these come together. I mean, it's really driven by, I'm being slightly facetious here. I hope you guys will come along on that journey. But like, for many different reasons, you always have to be predicting on something that is unlike anything that you've seen in your training data. And that's really challenging. I mean, it's challenging algorithmically, from people in machine learning. Like, usually when we learn statistics, right, we learn about IID and that we assume that the test is pulled from the same distribution. This is just fundamentally not true for the kind of work that we do up here. And so I think that's the hardest challenge. And so how do you set up your test to be predictive about generalization? How do you set up your training? How do you set up your algorithms? And this is true, I should say, not just for the silicon chemists. It's true for the human chemists as well, because the majority of clinical candidates today, of drugs being tested, came from patent busting. It's a term of art, but what it means is taking a molecule that somebody else has already patented and trying to make very, very small modifications. That's what the majority of chemistry today, the majority of clinical candidates come from that process. But what you end up with is something that looks very similar and behaves very similar to something that was already known. And so in some sense, that minimizes the impact on patients. If you want to cure a disease that hasn't been cured before, if you want to be fundamentally better than medicine that existed before, which you do, right? Like, I don't think anyone around here walks around saying, yeah, Alzheimer's, who cares about curing that? Yeah, cancer, side effects of chemotherapy are fine, right? Like, we want to do better than came before. You got to find something different if you want to be better. But in fact, it's a challenge both for the silicon chemist and for the human.
Great. You want to take us through a challenge?
Sure, very interesting. I think for us, at least in our area, and I suspect this probably applies in a lot of areas. You mentioned the human element. One of my concerns is actually the AI becoming so effective that it's to the point that it seems perfect to people, and it's not. But let's say pre-AI, our system was catching 50% of the intended things, and you had a person going through and flagging the other 50%, just making numbers up. But now it's getting better and better, and it's more reliably catching things almost 100% of the time, especially depending on what it is. But there are still some things that maybe slip through the cracks, right? Pieces of text and information that should be flagged, but for whatever reason gets missed. There's the human tendency to kind of say, this is all perfect, and there's 50,000 pages of information, and we're just going to skim through it a lot faster. And I think it's just natural, when it's that close to perfect, you're going to have a natural instinct to just kind of lapse. So how do we prevent that? How do we still make sure that that review is still taking place, it's still adequate, and making sure we're not accidentally releasing someone's personal information because it got missed? So that's a challenge, and I think that's something we address through both just educating our end users and working with them and making sure they understand the process of reviewing, helping to guide them through a process that hopefully directs their attention to where it's more likely to be things that are missed, so it's obvious to them and it's not just an onerous, tedious task. And the other element is building what other features or what other ways could we also attack this test that's not using the same exact capabilities. So maybe there's a non-AI algorithm or functionality that we can also apply that maybe will catch some of the things that get missed. Continuing to analyze and learn from what specific characteristics of text or documents and things like that might be more problematic. So I think it's a multi-pronged approach to this problem, but I think that's a real concern. I mean, we'd much rather, or at least I think, lean more on there being a few more false positives that someone can just reject and say, we don't want to change that, than to have some false negatives, because those are easier for people to overlook.
And so is it fair to characterize each of these sort of last three answers from your different sort of vantage points within industry as a version of you're concerned about, and the fundamental challenge is it accurate enough in some way, right? Are there few enough errors? Does it work on the set of data that's not like the training data? Does it have too many false positives or negatives? Those are all sort of, I know they're different issues of accuracy in some ways, but yeah. It sounds like a theme. Accuracy, is that the big one for you as well, or something else that you think is the fundamental challenge?
Yeah, well, that's a problem out there. But before I answer your question, maybe I want to ask to the audience, right? How many of you represent the pharmaceutical industry here? Okay, so sort of biotech, healthcare. Okay. Well, the reason I'm asking is this. There's a whole host of problems out there, right? The fundamental problem in data science or AI, from science and engineering aspect is a whole lot different than the problems that exist at the cultural level, right? And there's a problems specifically that I see in biotech, pharmaceutical, life sciences in general. So let me, share a couple of problems that I see at pharmaceuticals. At least in my company, and to the degree that I know of a couple of few other pharmaceuticals, the data is largely decentralized, right? Data sits in different business units today. So my customers, my stakeholders will come to me and say, Vic, I want AI to be done here. I want a machine learning model. I want a data science model for this aspect of manufacturing data, for clinical trial data, something about marketing, commercial data, right? Something about unstructured data, a bunch of SharePoint docs, Jira issues, Confluence, a whole host of documents space out there. So when I start hearing all of these conversations, I find that the biggest challenge to me as a data and AI practitioner is how do I identify the right set of data in the first place, right? So once I identify that data, then it gets to another problem, which is how do I access that data? Just because you have data does not mean you can access the data, right? There's a lot of protocols, particularly in healthcare, in pharmaceuticals, which gives rise to the next set of problems, which is how do I enable that data? Just because you have access to data does not mean you could use that data as much as you like. I was just going through a couple of projects within our different parts of the business. The challenges usually does not come upfront in data science and AI. So as you started working through business stakeholders, identify business problem, identify data, let's say you identify an algorithm to tackle a specific use case. But the problem will emerge when you start linking those data again, right? There's the EMR data, there's a payer data, there's healthcare data. In normal data science, what do? You just expand this sample size, right? Make your data as big as possible, but it's not possible just within the regulatory space of pharmaceuticals as well. So I see the fundamental challenge to be around the data exists there, but there is no clear and easy way for us to engage and link all of those siloed data just so that we can have a large amount of modeling and AI training going on, right? And this is true for in-house modeling, or this is true for a vendor approach, right? You can bring in a platform, any platforms, but they are not going to magically fix your problem because they have to connect to 100 different systems. And our system, they don't talk, right? Because we onboarded them at different places. So there's a whole lot of data aspects, that keeps me bothered, in a good way, right? It's problems that need to be solved. But yeah, that's how I'll take this.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I think a lot of people are wondering about is how is generative AI used for all this? A lot of attention around generative AI and large language models and so forth in recent months and years. And so wanted to ask everyone, how do you use generative AI in the work that you do? And any aspect of that you'd like to explore for the audience. Why don't we go right to the middle of the panel with Abe?
Sure. So in the way we use generative AI is, again, I'm thinking in terms of AI for chemistry, and what we focus on, I should have said, is, it seems like there's a lot of pharma people here. I can use some terms of art. Yeah, thanks. Is small molecule. So my comments are like specifically constrained small molecule medicinal chemistry. Really, that's what we focus on. And so what we use generative AI for is dreaming up new molecules. Now, what's the problem with generative AI? He asked rhetorically and then answered. The problem with generative AI, I got somewhere. Okay, good. Okay, the problem with generative AI is it hallucinates. Okay, so the version of that's in ChatGPT is it just makes things up. It's a bullshit artist, right? And it looks you right in the eye, and it's really confident, and it gives you. I'm sure you work with people like this, right? Where boy, and you sort of start listening. You're like, you have no idea what you're talking about, but the confidence is incredible, right? Okay, so that's ChatGPT. you guys may have heard of, there was this like, you may know this one. Okay, so there was like a lawyer and he submitted a brief and the other side was like taking a really long time and the judge eventually was like, dudes, what is taking you so long? And they were like, we're sorry, we just can't find any of the cases cited in this brief. And the judge went back to the first lawyer and was like, can you help him out? And he's like, I copied it out of ChatGPT.
Oh,
right?
no.
Like, and it had just made up cases, which sounded, Wainwright v. Cartwright, 1993 or whatever, but it was just made up, okay? So in small molecule chemistry, the equivalent of hallucinations is coming up with molecules which you can't make, right? So they look perfectly good and they look cogent and sensible, but you take them to a medicinal chemist and they say, yeah, sounds great. Just give me 20 graduate students and a research agenda for 5 years and I'll figure out how to synthesize that thing. That's the problem with hallucinations, okay? And so the version that we did of generative AI is being able to search large spaces. The largest one is in our CDK7 program where we searched 15.7 quadrillion molecules. That was the search space that we tackled. But then you put the decoder, and that's an interesting number, okay? Like just to write that, that's a number which you can no longer search except with generative AI methods. That's the interesting thing. Because at 15.7 quadrillion, picking up each molecule, just writing it to disk on Amazon, takes something like 13,000 years. Okay, so it's not the case that you can actually pick up each of these molecules and look in turn. You actually must do your search and your analysis in the latent space and then decode back into molecules. It's the only way to do it. That decoder we put on rails where it guarantees synthesizability, 100% synthesizability of the molecules that then it decodes for you. Okay, so that's the way that we use generative AI. And we published this, we published it at NeurIPS, which is, after this conference is like the leading ML conference. It's the academic one. Right, so we published it. And
Distant second, right?
Distant second, right, exactly. It's the term scientist engineer, so they named it C'est la vie, the combinatorial synthesis library variational autoencoder, if you want to look it up. That's how we use it.
Helps.
Thanks. Well, who'd like to go next?
Yeah. What is the question?
Oh,
Sorry, 'cause
how do you use generative AI? Maybe someone who remembers the question.
Are you saying my answers are too long?
That's quite interesting. So what is
Use of generative AI in your work. To what extent is it generative AI versus not, and sort of the promise of generative AI for what you do?
Yeah, so, well, in my company, we have a dedicated task force that looks at reviewing generative AI use cases. There's a lot of opportunities, and some of those opportunities now are challenges in different ways. So, well, if you look at the use cases perspective, a lot of the use cases today tend to converge around how do we intake a bunch of unstructured data out there, lots of documents, links, SharePoints, meeting notes, all of those, right, unstructured text format, and being able to search and surface that in ChatGPT-like fashion. Of course, as a company with more, strict protocol in this industry, right, itself, we have not allowed ChatGPT for our employees to use, but we have instantiated a much secured version of ChatGPT. We gave it a different name just so that our employees can still benefit from having access to some of these generative AI capabilities, right? So that's number one. A lot of the use cases today, just because the inherent nature of the large language models, basically a token predictor, right? So they tend to focus more on the text specific. But the opportunities has started to shape up in a way that how do we parse large number of corpus, large number of documents, like FDA submissions, for example, and being able to apply these large language models, get some insights, and then top on that with a bunch of natural language processing, like summarization, sentiment analysis, extraction, classification. There's a whole host of things that you could possibly add on top of large language models and make the use cases seem more, more profound. Right. The challenges that comes with generative AI today is, I would say, other than the technical, culturally or from the learning perspective, it's really hard to tell. So do we do something today? So do we do it, right? So do we jump on it or so do we wait, right? In the last 9 months, there have been, 10, 11 different models that have emerged, right? Every single tech vendor out here has generative AI on their chart, right? So everyone's talking about it, so it's going to be a part of the roadmap. So as a company, do I go and build in-house capability around large language models? Do I go and fine-tune my models, right? Or should I wait and let Microsoft, Amazon, a bunch of other companies come up with innovations so that I can start working on something with the competitive advantage in it? So that conundrum about when to switch, when to wait, right? Whether I get obsolete, whether I'm investing a lot of money, is really causing a lot of, I would say, confusions, in the leadership, of course, right? I mean, I sit in a board with, for AI strategy for the enterprise-wide and the data vision, and I still sense that. So that's a challenge to me. I wouldn't, minus the technical challenge, we can talk about that for another 2 hours, but I guess that's the whole thing, right, about the cultural level and learning.
Yeah, well, particularly in such a rapidly evolving field, decisions about when to start adopting new tech and so forth. Zach, do you want to take us through generative AI quickly in your
Sure,
work?
happy to. So one of the key documents to produce at the end of a clinical trial for the sponsors is a plain language summary. And if you've ever participated in a trial, you might have received one in the mail or in your email where it's like a 2-page simple summary written in at a 6th grade reading level, just explaining what the trial was intended for, how it was designed, what types of treatments different participants got, and what were the results. Like, was it effective or not, and what side effects did people have, and things like that. So this is another piece of transparency that kind of we have an application for and have been involved in for quite some time. And then when ChatGPT and generative AI started really becoming more mainstream, it occurred to us, obviously, like, this is a great potential use case for this. So we set out to say, can AI produce a complete draft 1 of a plain language summary using data sources from clinicaltrials.gov or from maybe the clinical study report or what have you that we have? Can we feed it? Can we have a series of prompts that are going to direct it to write the right paragraphs, put them in the right spots, and produce a document that's good? So we've explored that and are continuing to kind of grow that technology. And I'd say so far it's shown a lot of promise. I mean, it kind of depends on what you give it. Has to be good data. You have to have good prompts, but it's definitely showing that it can at least get a draft that then your plain language writer is going to then massage and improve and finalize. It's not going to just go right out of the door, at least not yet. You still have a very skilled writer who is skilled in both the technical aspects of the trial, but also like the best practices of writing these kinds of documents, who's going to then take it and improve it. But it takes a lot of the upfront work out of the equation, because it'll write, it puts it in the right format, it writes the text, and now it's just a matter of this wasn't worded quite right, or it missed an important component of a nuance of this trial or something like that. But getting that whole draft there has been a very interesting opportunity for us, and we look forward to continuing to grow that.
Great. Well, Abhijit, anything to add on generative AI?
Yeah, sure. We barely scratched the surface right now with generative AI. We operate in a GXP environment, and we have to be very cognizant about that. One of the biggest things we cannot do is to send data out, so out of the enterprise, out of the cloud that we operate in. So, there are different options to use generative AI. You can have your own LLM models, or you can run something within your own environment, for example. But the way we are kind of using it is to enable the end users to do better visualization and analytics of the data. So if you, this crowd has a lot of people who know data science and know how to query, but in the real world, there are very few who can do that. But then they want to know what the data tells them. And so using these generative AI techniques, we are able to kind of help them create queries that they can then use the data, underlying data, to visualize. And it has created a wow effect, but I like your analogy that they're like one confident guy and coming and telling you something, and then you scratching your face and saying, is this right? I mean, like, you do a regenerate of the same query and a different graph shows up. So it's like, to me, to all of us on my team, with like generative AI is like one love affair that I would really love to have, but I can't afford it. So, so that's where we stand. But we are scratching the surface. We are trying to. It has a lot of promise. Like we all agree to.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think that's a good segue. I think the love affair concept, I think society, especially recently, has a bit of a love affair with AI, or at least covering AI in the media and talking about it. And so I want to skip kind of right to sort of a big ticket, future-looking question, which is just how big of a difference do you think AI is going to make to this industry, to the development and discovery of new medicines in 10 or 20 years? Is it, the way I could pose it is it overhyped, underhyped, the right amount of hyped? Does anyone have a strong view on this and want to jump in?
I can start. I really like this question. I think it depends first off, like who is doing the hyping that you're talking about. Because I mean, in this group, this is the group that's hyping it, right? We see the vision, we see what AI can do, and we obviously buy into it. I went earlier this year to the Pharmaceutical Compliance Congress, and let me tell you, they're not as hyped. But they do see the potential. And I think their perspective on it is, we can't stop this from happening. But how do we do this responsibly? How does it work? They want to understand everything about it. What are the risks? How do we assess those risks? What are the potential pitfalls and all of that? And how can it be implemented the right way? So I think the answer to your question is somewhere in between, right? There is an incredible amount of potential across the board, like in all of these different pockets and other pockets of the life sciences in general. But there's also a need to do it responsibly and take the time to do the due diligence and implement it in a way that makes sense and you understand it. So it will take time. It's not going to just be a huge transformation where suddenly AI is doing everything. But I think in 10 years, it's not unreasonable to say that all the major pharma companies are going to be using AI in some way, in some capacity, probably to different degrees. But I think we will see it have a major impact.
The question is AI overhyped or underhyped? And the answer is yes. Okay. And again, that's facetious, but it's true. I mean, there are certainly people out there who are pitching what they can do, and the story is far beyond the reality, right? I mean, like we've met people like that, and I think we all have. At the same time, I mean, I think you just have to remember the Gartner hype cycle, right? Like, it comes up and it comes crashing down, and then there's the plateau of utility that these things actually have value. In my space, in the discovery space, people sometimes ask the question of like, well, show me the drug which has been invented by AI. And they ask it as if it's a mic drop moment. And in fact, replace AI in that with anything else. Show me the drug which was invented by the chemists. And if you try to answer any of them, then the biologists are probably up there sort of holding up their hands and be like, well, what about us? And the toxicologists and the chief medical officers designing the clinical trials? There's a lot of people who would be like, no, this wasn't just the chemists. And you know what? They're right. On the other hand, boy, the chemists are involved, right? Like, they're right. And so in some sense, the answer of like, show me the drug which was just done by the chemist is either you could legitimately think the answer is none of them because all the other people are involved, or you could say all of them because the chemists were a critical part. Either one is defensible, right? You probably just can't say like these six, right? Like that's the only answer which is indefensible if you're talking about the chemists or the biologists or the toxicologists or the clinicians, right? And so when we talk about show me the drug which was invented by AI, I think you're going to have the same answer. The answer is going to either legitimately be every single drug, because let's face it, AI today, when we say AI, we mean machine learning. When we say machine learning, we mean statistics, and statistics shows up everywhere, right? So either it means every single drug or it means none of them because you needed all these other pieces. And so is it overhyped or underhyped? Yes.
Fair enough. Any other thoughts on that? Or even just
Well-
under or over sort of prediction?
Well, I don't think I have enough of a data points, but I do have some experience talking to strictly computer scientists who tend to sort of overhype in different situations of AI. But it's hard when I go to Broad Institute and Whitehead and start having that conversation with a bunch of my friends who are doing hardcore biology stuff, right? Human body is complex. There's a lot of stuff that I have no idea. So I guess, echoing him, like the answer is yes. I mean, we don't know, right? So we'll find out. But there is a fundamental disconnect, right? At the knowledge level and representation level happening in chemistry and biology and AI. So we'll figure it out, right? Just a matter of time, I guess.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're at time, so we'll leave it at that. But thank you to our panelists. Thanks, everyone, for joining.